Welcome again and good evening. I'm Amy and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the museum. If you haven't been to the museum, it's really a wonderful place. We are in downtown Brooklyn in a decommissioned I&D subway station. Right now, our hours are from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursday to Sunday, and you can reserve tickets on our website. We also have a gallery and a shop at Grand Central Terminal. So for today's program, if you'd like captions, you can go to either captions or the three dots at the bottom of your screen, and then click captions and then show captions. So this evening, we will be learning about the wonderful work of artist Matthew Chavez in the New York City transit system and beyond. Matthew is a New York City-based artist and author, best known for creating Listening Lab and Subway Therapy. His participatory public installations have won awards, including MAS's Brendan Gill Prize, Gold at the Anthem Awards, and the Demos Transforming America Award. His organization, Art Plus People, creates empowering education programs and public works that intersect with art and life. He also mentors young adults and designs youth development programs with partners like The Door, which is a nonprofit that provides youth services to New York's most vulnerable communities. So today, in the spirit of Matthew's art practice, in which he creates these opportunities for creating communities and engagement, we invite you to turn on your videos if you feel comfortable. After Matthew's presentation, we'll have time for questions and discussion. To participate at that time, you can either put your questions into the chat or raise your hand. If you raise your hand, Matthew will call on you and you can unmute yourself, but also feel free to comment or ask questions in the chat at any point during the presentation as well. So now I'll hand it over to Matthew.
Hello. I hope everyone's doing well. I have the gallery view on. I always like to see people's faces. So if you feel comfortable and would like to have your video on, at least for this first part, that would be pretty cool. And if you want to have your video off, that's totally okay. Also, hopefully this will be a fun audio only experience. But I've got a fun presentation, I think. First though, I would really like to have kind of a grounding moment or a together exercise. It's something that I like to do in most of my meetings. If you can, again, if you want to put your video on so we can do it together, that would be great. I'm actually going to stop the share just for a minute. And then I would encourage you to put on gallery view. You'll see there are some faces, which will be fun. And if you would humor me, go ahead. And I'd like everybody to do a thumbs up. How about thumbs up with two hands? And maybe a heart. Excellent. Love it. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Let's get this share going. As you probably saw in the program, I'll be talking today about a variety of different topics around this one work called Subway Therapy. And I'm excited to tell you about it. If you're familiar with the work, Subway Therapy started in 2016, and we already did our Connect exercise, so we're not going to worry about that slide. It started in 2016 and has evolved in a bunch of different ways. So we're going to kind of go over the history of Subway Therapy. We're going to talk about how it may have affected brands and culture and how simple actions can sometimes create major waves in popular culture in ways that we don't expect. And then we'll chat a little bit about ephemeral community spaces and how Subway Therapy is an interesting example of one. And then some evolution of the project. There are different projects that have come out as a result of Subway Therapy. So we'll talk about that. A brief history. In 2016, early 2016, I moved to New York. I'm sure my mom thought I was nuts when I said I was going to somehow get a job by having a sign that said secret keeper and going to New York. I bought this table for like $50, and then the chairs I think were $30 for the pair. Obviously my sign is made out of cardboard, and I started going out into the New York subway to ask people about their secrets. The goal was to see if I could help people feel better about the things that they feel bad about. That was my guiding question. How can I help people feel better about the things that they feel bad about? And they wrote down in my little book of secrets various things that were really touching and interesting. And I'd done it twice, maybe 3 times. And I talked to this one particular woman who wanted to really talk smack about her boyfriend. He said, I hate my boyfriend's ex-wife and I hate my boyfriend's best friend. And I was, you know, she looked at me expectantly and I said, well, I hate him too. And then we just had this very silly conversation. And I remember this is at Third Avenue in Manhattan, and several trains went by. And she just sat and had this conversation with me, and we laughed and had a good time. She ended up writing this in my little book of secrets. And at the end, after about 20 minutes, she kind of had this more relaxed posture. And she said, man, this is great. This is like therapy. And I was like, that's funny. I should wear a suit. So about a week later, I started wearing a suit, and I changed the name of the project to Subway Therapy. I got a certificate of achievement from the dollar store, some wall art, and then added a bit of performative elements into the project. So I did this for 8 months, probably like once a week or something like that. It started getting shared online, which I thought was hilarious and weird. And I did this all the way up until November 8th, election day, 2016. Trump is elected president. I had been out doing this form of subway therapy, just talking to strangers the day of. And then the day after, on the way out, I thought, I don't know if people are going to really want to talk. So I wanted to give them a different opportunity to express themselves. And I brought, as you can see on the table, I brought sticky notes and pens. And then I had those white notepads are actually from that book of secrets that I took apart for some reason and bought tape. And I thought maybe people would tape them up or something. But anyway, obviously the sticky notes really took off. And so within a few hours, I didn't intend for this to happen, but it just kind of took off. And I didn't really know it, but it was going viral. By around 8 o'clock, it was about like this. And someone from New York One happened to walk by. And he said that as he was walking by and saw it, he just turned around and went back to work and grabbed his camera and then came back and did a quick spot, which went on the news that night. And then the following day, this is about at midnight. This is the point in time. I don't know if any of you are creatives or have worked on projects or done production. It was like at the end of the night, and I was like, what do I even do with all this? I can't leave it here. So I ended up leaving. I ended up not leaving it there. I took them all down and then brought them home with me. So the next day, there was a ton of press waiting, and it went viral and then spread to different subway stations. And so this was sort of the final result of that. And people have asked me what my favorite note is. I went out and did this yesterday, so it's something that is ongoing. And I just love this note so much. It showed up in the first day, or at least the first 2 days. I'm not exactly sure when. And I think it just captures the spirit of something that I try and do when I'm having conversations with others and navigating the world, developing youth programs, coming up with different ways to talk to someone that I'm having a challenging conversation with out in the world. I think it's a common thing to not understand, but if we can rely that we should try, it certainly helps. So this is subway therapy with sticky notes. As you can see, I'm very consistent in the way that I sit, which I think is quite funny. And yeah, I would be curious. I've had lots of conversations with strangers, and as we move into sort of influence and brands, I'm kind of curious if you've had any moments with strangers that have affected you in a meaningful way. So if you'd like to answer this in the chat, that would be great. Or it can just be something that you're thinking to yourself. So when was the last time you shared a moment with a stranger outside your walk of life in a meaningful way? So brands and culture, to kind of follow the chronology. After 2016 election, it goes to various different places in San Francisco and in Boston. This website appeared for Subway Therapy Boston, and they had a great Instagram. I was particularly envious of this group because it was so well designed. And it was kind of the first time when people were asking me if they could do it. And I was like, yeah, sure, of course. And then I would see stuff like this and I'd think, man, I wish I had a team. And they were, kind of part of my team, but also not really. And so that was sort of fascinating to have them show up first on Instagram when I would go to search for my own hashtag. And then throughout a month of it being up, there were different ways that people use the work. And I think that appropriation comes to mind when I think of using something for a purpose that was not necessarily intended. And I don't say that to say that these are bad examples of appropriation. It's just sort of a curiosity that I have about creative life. And once you release something into the public realm, how free should it be? I probably have like a very, very loose standards for freedom of creative expression. And so I really didn't mind if anybody did anything, especially at the site. There were 2 notes that I found that said, "Will you marry me?" which I think is very cute. And then, for political reasons, there were different officials that were using the Subway Therapy brand, like Cuomo. He wrote the quote that is on the Statue of Liberty. And then even me, I had a really interesting experience as we were taking the notes down. They were up from November 9th at Union Square, this installation that had around 50,000 notes at any given time, from probably November 10th or 11th through December 16th. And so we had this day, the MTA was ready to have the notes not be there anymore. And the New York Historical Society partnered with me and the MTA and the governor's office in order to create this takedown collection. So we were doing it on this day, and obviously I was looking silly because that's the thing that I like to do. And there was this crowd that formed towards the end of the day once my volunteers had left and the MTA crowd had left and the New York Historical Society collected all that they were going to collect. And then they had all gone, and it was just me by myself, and I was collecting notes. And there was a group that started being really upset with me. And there was this one woman in particular who kind of was leading the charge of this group that ended up being around 30 people. And she was just yelling at me and talking about how the work wasn't mine anymore, that it was the people's. And I really respected that she was so upset about it. And from her perspective, it was something that should have a life of its own that no one at that point was able to control. And then my point was that it was going to turn into trash. And then I didn't think that was right. And I really wanted to provide an opportunity to be a good steward of the notes and of expression. And I wanted to save them and maybe do a book or who knows what, or exhibitions later, or have them be collected by museums or who knows what. So she was yelling at me, and there was this crowd that was starting to get more and more riled up. And out of nowhere, this person comes up and says, "Yeah, and what about the bathrooms?" And then people started yelling about the bathrooms, like I was the reason that the bathrooms were closed in the MTA. At that point, I just said, "All right, I'm out of here," and I left. So I came back later and finished collecting the notes when it wasn't rush hour. But it's fascinating to sort of have that experience of my own work had turned into something that people really enjoyed, and to what degree was it mine to take it down and then make a book out of it or anything else. So these are all questions that I have that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but I think they're kind of interesting. So there's this book, you can buy it if you like, you can search it online. There's a second book, which I don't have a picture of. But yeah, if you search for it, it's out there. And then since then, there have been all sorts of different examples. This one is from Starbucks. And I think I took this maybe a year ago or so. I've seen more like this. And my curiosity is, do I have anything to do with this? I really don't know. Around 8 months after the big installation at the election, this shows up. And this is a very branded experience by American Eagle, in particular their young women's brand called Aerie. They had this Girls Stick Together campaign that they did, and I don't know how much it has to do with me. Hopefully this isn't going to blast you with sound. We'll find out. So they did this whole thing. Pretty fascinating. And so it's curious. I ran into a marketing person for American Eagle when I was on a train randomly, and ended up talking to them about whether the thing that I did in New York had anything to do with their campaign. And they said, well, the person I was talking to said that she had no idea, but that she had known that someone from their New York group had seen something with sticky notes somewhere, and that was sort of how the idea came about. So, time wise, I'm assuming 8 months for a big brand campaign, that makes sense. This was actually something that was in partnership with me. The Coach Foundation reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a project? And I said, yeah, sure. This is my first introduction to The Door. They are a center for youth in New York that does transformative youth services. They're an amazing organization, and Coach had seen a project that I had done. They were really curious if they could do something like that on their Coach store. And so we did this project, which I find kind of fascinating. It was more of like a, let's do this thing with youth in New York and something in front of our store. And I thought that it should be a bit more robust. So I created kind of like a education program that guided the young people through it. And then we did something in the subway, and then afterwards did something at the Coach store. And I'll talk about why that was significant later. Last year, this is an installation in the Ace Hotel in Kyoto. A really wonderful woman named Maggie James had the idea to do subway therapy, had reached out to me and said, hey, could we do a collaboration? I didn't see it. They went ahead and did it anyway, and I'm glad that they did. And the way that they honored subway therapy and the spirit and the story and its origins was really, really fantastic. It was really beautiful to see. And they ended up sending me 30,000 notes from this installation, which is pretty incredible. So yeah, it's just such a good example of how people can emulate or copy or take an idea and run with it and have it not feel bad. I thought it was just one of my favorite things that I've seen people do in public afterwards. So to talk about ephemeral community space, I want to kind of go back in time a bit. This is the wall in the Czech Republic. This picture's from 2014, but the Lenin Wall started after John Lennon's death in 1980. Different examples of this sort of started showing up, and I'm sure they showed up before the 1980s, like public expression places, but this one in particular coined a name that would enter popular culture later. So in Hong Kong, in 2014, Lenin Wall started showing up as a form of protest. And that continued. Again, there was sort of a resurgence of sticky notes and other written ephemera showing up as a form of anti-government protest. And more recently, there was a really awful incident in in Seoul, South Korea, where 150 young people died in a stampede during Halloween. And I was sent this picture by Mindy Fullylove. She's a mentor of mine and is a wonderful researcher that looks at the psychology of place and how there are various different ways that during a crisis, these centers for expression show up. spontaneously. But you can also see that there could be examples that show up more commonly in everyday life. And that's sort of what my curiosity is now. If you look at this, it says, be the reason someone smiles, need some uplifting, take a note of kindness with you, which I think is like very cute. I think it's really fun. I don't know if it's super inspiring or I think it's meaningful for particular individuals, but maybe lacks something that I like, which is maybe a target or a particular way of thinking about a specific topic. And so I think what's interesting about this is that people know that maybe something is missing from public space. And one really interesting example of someone who did something innovative is William Lewis. He's the director of marketing at Westfield World Trade, and he has a relationship with a friend of mine and former like participatory artist named Brandon Doman, who runs this project called the Strangers Project. Excuse me. And this is in the Westfield World Trade Center Mall, or the Oculus Mall in New York. And it is next to the Apple Store, the busiest store in the mall in Westfield World Trade. And I think it's pretty astounding that Will had the idea to fill a vacant storefront with a participatory art project or a community artwork. It's such a good example of how retail spaces and even empty storefronts in New York, or if I look at San Francisco and all the problems they're having with vacant storefronts, it just seems like a no-brainer to me that these vacant spaces can be filled with ideas, can be filled with expression, can be filled with people enjoying each other's company or having brushes with other strangers. So I think it's really amazing that these things show up. And as we're increasingly siloed by our own choices and we are vulnerable to influence, there is also an opportunity to have spontaneous opportunities to connect. The internet's not a really great place. All of these projects were in 2019, and they're all over the world. This is in Berlin. This is back in New York. This is a collaboration with another artist. I throw all these examples up as examples of like how to create discourse, and all with relatively simple materials, public spaces. This is with Rice University in Texas. This is at the Transit Museum. It was people writing about their favorite transit memories. For Pride, this is a bit more colorful than I usually do, but I am an artist sometimes. This sticky note secret project was very dark and very interesting, and really dove into a variety of different topics. This is part of that activation with Coach. I got a ticket, which was quite funny in 2019. But yeah, I bring up all these examples. It's just, I kind of, with my own imagining, came up with topics that I thought would be interesting to talk about. And as one individual going out, every week or every other week and inviting discourse and inviting expression, every time that I go out, I have people come up to me and say, this is the best thing I've done all week. Like, this made my month. This made my year. And I had people say this, I did this project yesterday. So this is a picture from yesterday. And, again, had someone, even though the topic wasn't super spicy, it was just what's been making you smile recently, which was suggested by a friend of mine, Brielle, who wanted to go out and do a sticky note project. People had such meaningful experiences, writing notes, asking me questions. I like to stand off to the side now and not be like goofy in the middle of it. But it's just amazing to see how simple it is. And as of right now, there is no permit for someone like me who's interested in doing social good projects to be able to do these works without thinking we might get, a ticket or arrested or something like that. So I find that to be kind of interesting. I had a conversation with the new office. Mayor Adams appointed a director of the public realm. So someone who has their eyes on how public space can be better in New York at public transit centers. This is mostly above ground. So transit centers, sidewalks, parks, and the waterfront, and maybe a few others. And I had a meeting with their office, and I basically was curious what they're interested in terms of policy or action. And they're on an exploratory mission to see how they can best serve the community. But one of the things that I mentioned and asked them about was the permitting system. Certainly, I don't think everybody should go out and just, write questions on walls and invite discourse, especially if it has a political purpose or if it has some sort of, objective, which isn't to say that I don't have objectives sometimes, like I do brand partnerships too. But yeah, there's just not anything in particular that would allow someone to get a grant or do this work. But, with all those thoughts in mind, I'll talk a little bit about how things have evolved. I was really interested in how I could create a ramp for other artists or individuals who might also want to do these works. And, I took this odd ramp towards success where I could take risks in the subway and do different things. And so I developed a project-based learning framework that focused on learning how to do the works, going out and doing them, and then creating impact in the community. And I focus on these particular kind of like pillars of growth for any participants in the program, regardless of age. But an example of this is in 2021, I created a social good project incubator for The Door, that group that I really loved, and worked with 5 members of The Door to develop this project called Listening Lab. We didn't know what the name was before. As you can see on the top, it was called Listening Project for a little bit, and then that turned into Listening Lab. It's been pretty amazing. We just started our second cohort. Desire is depicted in the lower right-hand picture, and they're part of the new cohort of 4 that is connected with the Levee Center, a nonprofit that serves young people in the Lower East Side. So to give an example of just some numbers, because I think it's fun, in about 8 hours of time, this was during a research study we did with Rice University. In about 8 hours of time, we had almost 6 hours of conversation. That's with setup on either side. So essentially, as soon as we had the table up, people were talking. Let's say that's 71,000 words shared between strangers, which I think is pretty amazing. And these programs are cohort members will go through a 6-week training program where they meet with different individuals like Brandon or Mindy Foley Love, and they learn from me in order to think about how they can go out and do these works. And then we do them together and have showcases. And we had a small thing at the Whitney in March of last year. And Fadwa in particular was invited to speak at the conference that we won an award for. It's very fun. And this is what it sounds like.
We miss the human element. I don't have friends. All my classmates, none of them are my friends. I didn't know anything about them. We finished the whole semester together, no communication, no email communication, no telephone communication. I don't have anyone to ask, like if I have some challenge, someone from my classmates might have better knowledge, give me some feedback, opinion, give me some direction. That part is gone. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everything is by yourself. And you feel like, you see them, but you don't know them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part is also a little bit frustrating, like, Yeah, that part is very challenging.
So that was a conversation that Fadwa had with someone in Jackson Heights. And this is one of the things that she said at that conference that she spoke at. She said, I felt myself breaking out of the tunnel vision I had of the world, with each conversation I had. And I thought that was pretty amazing, considering around 61% of people experience chronic loneliness, which is from a Harvard study last year. It is, in my opinion, interesting that there are not more examples of spontaneous opportunities to connect with other people in shared space. So parks, transit centers, even coffee shops and things like that. I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were joking about, or not joking, but we were kind of dreaming about how we could create a system for conversations where you'd like basically get a flag that, you know, has like some sort of visual cue that says, I'm open to meeting someone new, or I'm open to a conversation. And then you put that on your table as you're having your coffee, and someone has a visual cue that says, I, you know, can go and talk to that person. But we haven't really developed a lot of that stuff. If there are any examples that people know, put them in the chat. I would love to see them. But and I think a lot about why that hasn't happened. More recently, I heard another study that 74% of people interviewed by the Immigrant Council, they did a study, and I'm not sure how many people were in it. I couldn't find it. They said that 74% of people didn't feel like they belonged to their immediate community. And there's something really striking about that. Which isn't to say that subway therapy is the answer, certainly, but I definitely think that it could help. I just took this time lapse yesterday to show people walking by and choosing to participate and think. And I think the more of these that we can see in the world, the better. And that's all I have. Would love to have I love conversation. So I built in basically 30 minutes of lecture, and then would love to just chat about whatever it is that you would like to chat about. So we can bring this back up at the end. But yeah, what are people thinking about? I also have the chat up, so I can, if you want to raise your hand, we can do an unmute situation, so you can actually just chat.
I mean, maybe oh, Hillary, do you want to go first? I have a lot of questions, but I've already talked today. Hillary, if you want to go first.
Sure. I was, I was thinking as you were going through your presentation, especially, I feel like on some level we are having these spaces, at least online, where people are engaging with strangers, like putting up a comment on a Twitter board. And what do you see as like the fundamental difference between that kind of engagement versus that public space focus that you're kind of engaging with on these symbol?
It's interesting. Excuse me. It's really interesting that there's this very strong parallel between a Facebook wall with ideas and like a subway therapy sticky note wall in the subway. It's such a different thing, and the nuance of how it's different are, one of the biggest things is just that it's in person. And when you're doing things that are in person, they're so much more meaningful than if they're not. Which isn't to say that social media isn't a good thing or doesn't create like a meaningful impact, seeing pictures of family or ideas or discourse or other things like that. But I think that they're more fleeting, and there is something so beautiful about writing something by hand. So while the ideas themselves might be one experience that you can see online, the physical action of someone taking the time to write something, and then also it takes longer to write something than it does to type something. And so I believe that people have a more meaningful experience that is maybe unconsciously meditative. And so what people write is either extremely honest and top of mind, or it's very thoughtful. And I think that's really, really cool. But yeah, I've never been able to get into Twitter. My brain doesn't read it well. It's like really difficult to parcel through the information for me. But I could stand at the subway therapy installation for 2 hours and just read what people are writing, and that's engaging to me. And I somehow like that way of receiving small bits of information related to one topic is much more consumable, in my opinion. But yeah. I'm seeing people put stuff in the chat. Yeah, please, if you want to put questions in the chat, we can answer questions from the chat too. I'm going to read the one that Rebecca wrote. She says, is there anything in particular to a transit station, like urban infrastructure, that's integral to the project? Or is it that it is in public and well-populated and the mobility or infrastructure aspect is not so important? I look for a variety of different things when I'm going and doing an installation. Like, for example, the one that I did yesterday is in another kind of transfer tunnel at 34th Street Penn Station. The place where I normally like to go is the bypass tunnel between the 123 and the LFM lines at 14th Street, 6th Avenue. That station I love because there's this really, really long expanse, and there is built-in infrastructure in between. I don't know how to describe it. So there are doors for MTA employees to go in and out of, and they open outward towards the pathway that people are walking. And so there are these metal guardrails. And what that actually does is it shapes the way that people are walking through the pathway and creates maybe 4 feet of space between the wall and where people are walking. And that infrastructure creates a nice distance between people. They don't have to like walk. They're not intentionally walking around whatever thing I have set up. And so that I find to be very useful to me. But then also, I don't want to put sticky notes onto like existing public art. So basically I'm looking for like blank space, like really, really high foot traffic areas. If there's no people, they're not going to write on notes, you know. So if 10,000 people walk by in 6 hours, then and 1% participate, then 1,000 people will, or if 1% of 10,000 participate, 100 people will write on notes. So if 100,000 people walk on by, then 1,000 people will write notes. I think more than 1% of people participate, which is nice. But yeah, in different places, different, you know, participation. So there's that. Does anybody want to ask a question with their voice?
I have some questions, just maybe to get other people warm up. You also don't have to raise a physical hand or necessarily turn on your camera. You can use one of the reactions below to put up a digital hand if you want to just use your voice. Anyway, kind of thinking about Hillary's question, you know, your physical projects still have an anonymous component. Do you still get any haters or trolls who write not so great things that you take down?
In the last couple of days since I was doing the project, I haven't seen any like haterish notes, if that makes sense. There are people walking by who just don't like it at all. And I always find that to be really funny. Like, it doesn't bother me, but people are like, what is this? Like, I can't believe this is here. And it's just funny to me. I'm like, what's like what do you, why does somebody like not like something colorful and fun? And I guess if like you're really trying to be in the zone and like not think, and you're walking on your way home and you see like some colorful, you know, garbage to you, it's bothersome. Like, it really upsets people. But yeah, it's pretty funny. Usually I'll have these great interactions with people. Probably the demographic of people that participate the least are older men, like maybe 40 to 65. And so there are these guys like MTA employees, like super like burly, hard New Yorkers that will like kind of talk smack as they're walking by. And I think it's so funny because the more I'm there, the more I meet them, they like the project more and more. And so by the end of it, they're my friends, and they're like, Matt, what's up? I'm like, you gonna write today? They're like, yeah, I got a good one. I'm gonna take a picture for my wife. It's super fun. So, you know, I think it really, you know, once people understand what it is, it's pretty fun. Also, there's something about doing it as an individual that's very different than doing it as an organization. I remember this one person came up to me and they were like, why, what are you, okay, so they're like, you're a student. And then I was like, no. And they're like, you're you're religious. You're part of like a, you're part of a group. And I was like, no. And they're like, you work for the city. I was like, no. And they're like, you are, and they like said like 3 or 4 more things, like groups that might do these types of things. And I was just like, no. And I was laughing, and then by the end I go, so you're telling me that you just are doing this by yourself just because you're doing it? And I said, yeah. And they were like, this is amazing. And it's interesting that it kind of takes that degree of I don't know. I think people like are so afraid of othering. And so like, it must be that something is put on by a group that we don't like. And so, it really takes a degree of permission for someone to be able to enjoy something today, especially in the divisive nature of our society. It's very difficult to just enjoy something or, not need to like look at the sources behind it or why it's there or things like that. So anywho, more questions. I see more in the chat, which I will be happy to read.
I have a verbal question, Matthew, if that's
Yay.
okay. I'm curious if there was ever a time that someone shared something either in the listening lab or on a sticky note about how they were really struggling. And it was a time when either you felt like you needed to intervene in some way or someone else kind of in the public felt like they needed to intervene on behalf of somebody because they were sharing something very personal about a struggle.
Mm-hmm. I've had, the first thing that comes to mind is I've had a handful of people either talk to me about suicidal ideation or I've seen notes that are related to it. Usually what I will do in those cases is I will post about it online with some resources, especially when people write about that. I will post online and say like, hey, if this is your note, I just want to say that here are some opportunities for you to communicate with others about what you might be going through. If you want to reach out to me, you can. And so I will just let people message me. I think that I have a particular nature that allows me to be both attentive and porous. So when I'm talking to people about particularly heavy issues, I feel well equipped to receive it and also not to hang on to it like emotionally or spiritually, which can be extremely heavy. I've had friends of mine say that they want to do it and try and do it, and then they'll hear something really heavy and feel like very, very affected by it. So I haven't. I'll tell you a really fun story that's related to that topic, even though it is very dark. There was this guy who sat down with me while I was doing subway therapy. This is a story that has a happy ending. And Jeffrey was his name. And basically he just said that he had a plan. He had everything all laid out. He was on his way to go tell his ex-wife what his plan was and that he just didn't want to be alive anymore. And we just talked for almost an hour, maybe like 45 minutes or an hour. And just about things that he was doing and what he might look forward to, or I really liked him. He was really nice and he had a great smile, and we just talked about all that. And I gave him my phone number and I said, hey, call me anytime of the night, whatever, if you're feeling like you need to talk to somebody. And I didn't talk to him for 3 months, and I sort of thought about him. And then I was traveling with my friend Eric, and so we were staying in this hotel, and I get this phone call from an unknown number. I pick it up, and it's like, hey, this is Jeffrey. I was like, Jeffrey, no way, what's up? And I was so elated, to hear from this person. And he's like, I just wanted to let you know that, things are better now, and I really appreciate you taking that time to talk with me. And I was like, Jeffrey, yes, like, I'm glad you're doing better. So that's one example. but yeah, I mean, people really, I think people need places to have conversations like this. And you know, obviously therapy is a good thing for people. Obviously, there are lots of other ways that I think people can get more serious help for more serious issues. There was this random guy that came up to me one time who said, hey, this is before I was doing sticky notes. He goes, hey, I know you're not a therapist or whatever, but I have a really bad relationship with my ex-wife and my kid. I want to have a good relationship with my kid. Can you like hook it up with some do you know any therapists? And I was like, it just so happens I do. So I keep a list of services that I can point people towards. So yeah, in that instance, I just did an email connection with a therapist that I had a relationship with who at least could point him in another direction if he wasn't the right person. So yeah, that stuff comes up pretty often. I see someone's named Anecdoter says, have you ever felt unsafe or had a troubling experience doing this? On a few occasions, I've felt unsafe. Not many. I had this one guy that was just yelling at me because he was really upset. And I felt more bad for him. And I was more thinking about the safety of the people around. This is like at the height of subway therapy craze in 2016. And it was a guy, there was this Japanese news crew that was doing kind of a deep dive on subway therapy. And this guy comes up and he's picking off notes and like throwing them. And he was doing some, you know, who knows what, Twitter story or something like that. And, you know, I ended up talking to him and be like, hey, if you really don't like it, that's fine. But also what you're saying is not super accurate to what it looks like. So why don't you just read a few? If you're really not into it, then do whatever you feel like you need to do. And I'll clean up the aftermath. And he looked around and he was like, you know what, these are actually pretty good. Like, you know, all right. And then he went up to this Japanese news crew. They go up to him and say, hey, can we interview you? And he's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. So he's being interviewed and they say, and I used to go by Levee when I was doing this project. I pretty much just go by Matthew now. And they were like, it seemed like Levee really changed your mind. And it's just like, immediately he like realized that there was this power imbalance and that he wasn't the powerful one in that moment. And like just it turned into this whole thing. And he was like yelling and people were yelling at him. And I had to like try and stop this crowd from like attacking this guy. It was very, very strange and weird. So I felt more unsafe for others in that situation than me. But yeah, not any particular unsafe moments. I don't recommend doing this by yourself, by the way. If anybody is interested in these works, feel free to reach out to me. I had my email somewhere on one of these slides. You can email me at subwaytherapy@gmail.com or at Matthew@artpluspeople.com. I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, don't recommend doing it by yourself. I do it by myself, but I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of training. I kind of know what to do. I'm also happy with just like walking away if things get a little odd. But yeah, it's definitely not for everyone. I also see who participates the most. I'd actually say it's really interesting how diverse the groups that participate are. There's only that group that I mentioned that doesn't participate as much. But even then, it's still not it's not like a 0%. I would say pretty much everybody that walks by that I could put into a group would participate to varying degrees. Jacob asked an interesting question. Can you comment on the game face that we all have when we commute? It seems to me that a key part of this work is that it breaks down the facade we all carry. Yeah, I think it definitely does. There's the game face on the train that gets broken by particular moments. There was this one great moment where everybody's kind of guard went down. There was someone that was sitting next to me that was playing music really loud on their phone, and you could tell people were annoyed by it. And this other person gets on the train who's also playing loud music. And then they crossed paths in this really funny way where they were looking at each other Like they were upset that the other person was playing music. And then everyone else on the train just kind of was looking at each other, and we just started laughing, and it was kind of like a group laughing session. So yeah, there are these moments that come up that make me think of that. And yeah, subway therapy for sure. You know, New Yorkers in particular, right? Fast walking, you know, and even for me, it would take a lot to stop and participate in some participatory work. That the Strangers Project, Brandon's project, you know, I had walked by it 6 times. And I don't know if to this day I've ever like fully participated in the project, even though now I've seen it and been around like hundreds of times. So yeah, I'm more of a quiet participant, if that makes sense. But yeah, that Gameface, I don't exactly know how to break through it, because you want to also let people just be relaxed, and you don't want to try and engage too much. Again, this visual cue comes to mind on how you can break through. There's a really wonderful individual that does this subway social club. I'm blanking on their name. Oh, Claire, thank you. Claire Fuhr. Claire, thanks, Jennifer. So Claire does the Subway Social Club and has pins. My pin's not around. Have these pins that you can wear, and if you're part of the Subway Social Club, there is an insinuation that you are open to a conversation when you're on public transit. And what a great idea. Like, I think that type of thing is awesome. And you don't really see it. There's really nothing popular that I know of that allows people to connect. I mean, like in a city full of single people, certainly there should be some sort of like, I don't know, day where you can wear a balloon or something and, you know, find other people that you might not normally meet or something like that. I think about stuff like this all the time. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, it would be cool to see more of it. We have a few minutes left.
You see the last question?
I do. I was seeing if anyone would jump in with their wonderful voice. Okay, so Grace was asking about the who participates the most, which I think I covered, but also how does it vary versus brand things and versus listening lab. I think listening lab, I don't have a ton of, you know, like anecdotal data where like in my head right now, I'm kind of like combing through and thinking about who has sat down and why. And I don't think there's any particular demographic that stands out to me that participates in that particular project, although it is different. When you sit down for a conversation, you're really signing up for something that's much more involved than writing a sticky note. So I think for that project, it definitely caters to people who want to have a conversation or they are interested in saying something themselves. I suppose that's not like a demographic, but it's a type of person. And then for brand deals, I try and keep brand activations as like minimally branded as possible. So I don't see a big difference in how people participate unless, I guess if I was working with a group that was particularly contentious and I wanted to reveal that I was working with them, then certainly that could influence how people participate, but I haven't seen it yet. I also see, this is my first time hearing the phrase participatory artist. What are more ways to get involved and learn more besides a Zoom meeting? Yeah, participatory art is sort of a not thing. It's like a thing, but it's not a thing. There are a few artists who are in the field, which I guess is my field. One could call me a participatory installation artist or a social practice artist. It's another way to kind of talk about the work that I'm doing. There's a group called Illegal Art that does participatory work. I would say Charlie Todd is the founder of Improv Everywhere, and they do a bunch of really fun works. They're not so spontaneously participatory, but they're, more crafted experiences that people then chance upon. I think that's a pretty good way to say that. Brandon has his great project, the Strangers Project, and then, maybe I don't know if this is true, but probably the most prolific artist in the participatory space is Candy Chang. She does a really fantastic project that's been really replicatable called Before I Die walls, that I've seen in person by chance, as well as, I've seen a ton of things online, and she did a really amazing participatory piece at the Rubin, which she maybe outcompeted me for. I had a meeting with them about what to do in the space, and then shortly after there was a Candy Chang piece there, and I was like, she got me. So, but I was very happy to see it. It was much more beautifully done than I think I had imagined for, a wild sticky note project. So yeah, if you'd like to hear more, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So the best email, so you can either message subwaytherapy@gmail.com, or you can message me at matthew@artpluspeople.com. If you're interested in doing any works like this, I would be happy to share advice or whatever it is that you may be interested in. If you want to check out some of these other projects I mentioned, I started a company called Art Plus People in order to help other artists do these works, as well as help negotiate contracts for different current artists that are doing it. I like contract work, and I also think negotiation is kind of fun. So yeah, if you're interested in reaching out or want to learn more, I would love to share anything I have to offer. Also, you can go to subwaytherapy.com.
So,
and we're about done.
Yeah, so before I close us out, but if also people have questions and we can go over a little bit, but I do have one more question I wanted to ask, which is back to the prompt you shared earlier with us, because you probably, out of anyone I've ever met, has probably had the most meaningful interactions with strangers through your projects. And how has that changed you and your life?
I had this really interesting experience early on doing subway therapy, where I talked to this guy who sat down, and he had a really like torn up security jacket on, and he looked really nervous, and it made me feel really nervous. And to set this scene, we're in the subway station at, I think we might have been on the platform at the 6th Avenue stop. So where the trains are going by, which is particularly loud. I don't really like being there because it's actually not good for conversation, or definitely not sticky notes, because the trains are like actively going by and screeching, and there's metal dust. And so don't do that. But I'm talking to this guy, he's really nervous. And, I talk to people of many different aesthetics. He happened to be Black, and at the time, I maybe had my guard up a little bit because of his nervousness, and the jacket was kind of torn, and I wasn't really sure how to like think about the situation. And so I was kind of like processing like how I was receiving him as he was sitting down, and he was basically saying, he went on to say that he was thinking about doing something, and he wasn't sure if it was a good idea or not. And he told a bunch of his friends, and they all said it was a bad idea, but he really thought that he was going to do it. And it made me feel nervous. And he kept kind of like looking around, and I instead of, I didn't really feel unsafe. And I just kind of like let all of my bias like be a conversation in my mind. And then I just kept saying yes. I just kept saying, tell me what it is, like let's chat about it, like whatever it is. And like he kept not telling me, and it created this thing in my brain where I just felt weird. And then eventually he goes, okay, I want to go with the crews on ghost shows and see if they're real or not. And I was like, what? That's what are you talking about? And it was so funny and weird and sort of like relieving in that moment, because like I didn't know what he was going to say. I didn't even know what it was possible that he could be nervous about, that he told all his friends, but that they thought was a bad idea. And so really, I think it was a moment where I looked at like what I was thinking and how I was receiving him based on how he looked and just like how he was acting, and just really broke down my, internal workings. I with my friend Dirk, we kind of touched on doing some research on awe and doing some interviews with people. And there was a white paper that was written. It was like a research study. I can't remember the college that did it, but it was, one of the fairly large colleges that does good research on different topics. And they were doing the study on awe. And one of the main characteristics was a experience of a need to, or how is it described? You will experience a lack of accommodation when you experience a moment of awe, amongst other things. But it's a hallmark of the experience of awe, where basically when you experience it, it's larger than what your brain maybe can receive. And what you have to do in order to participate in that moment is either reject the idea or you have to accommodate it. And if you don't have the space to accommodate, you basically have to like make your brain larger, if that makes sense. Or you have to increase your capacity for thinking in order to receive something. And that experience of accommodating something larger than you thought possible is not only a hallmark of awe, but also something that I experience pretty regularly while doing subway therapy. So in a very long way, answer your question, I think that when I am having experiences with people, my world gets larger all the time. And sometimes it gets larger in really big ways, and sometimes it gets larger in very small ways. And I love that aspect of it, and I would just love for everybody to talk to more people, talk to more strangers in the safest way you can do it, honestly.
Yeah, Matthew, that was a really good answer.
Thanks.
Anyway, I think that's a good ending point. Even though I could probably listen to you all night, your stories are just so inspiring and moving. And even in the chat, like everyone is just, thank you so much for doing this program with us. And thank you all for joining us. We'd love to see you at the museum if you're in town. I'm going to put a bunch of links in the chat if you want to copy and paste them. There's information to visit the museum or to become a member. If you enjoyed tonight's program, becoming a member is one way to help us, or to make a donation is a great way to make sure that we can keep doing these free programs. We have 2 more virtual events coming up. We have one next Thursday. We'll hear from our MTA colleagues on accessibility updates in the transit system. And then beyond that, we have two more virtual programs Thursday evenings in August about New York City ferry service and moving artworks in transit, which you can find on our website. They're all free, and that's where you can register. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor, Con Ed, for supporting our virtual programs. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.